I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to the story and welcome to Friday. We've got some great news. It was so nice to wake up this morning, wasn't it, to not have any rain falling? I was on my back porch. I think I even saw some sunshine. We did get tons of rain, though, over the last several days, and that got us thinking about a modern marvel of sorts built by the city of Portland by ratepayers to help handle all that rain. It's called the Big Pipe Project. It was built over 20 years. They significantly changed, in a good way, what happens to the Willamette River when it rains that hard. And that's our big story tonight. This week when it poured rain, we heard about something that's a bit unusual these days, a combined sewer overflow in Portland. Now that happens when there's simply too much water and sewage in the system, and yeah, I know it's gross to think about, but a bunch of the sewage and all that water just flows directly into the Willamette River. It used to happen all the time, something like 55 times a year. In fact, when I got here in 1990, most folks would never dare to swim in the polluted Willamette River. But that has all changed in a very big way, and it's thanks to the Big Pipe Project. Let's take a look at how that happened.
Portland's first sewage treatment plant opened back in 1952. Back then, the city had a combined sewer system. That means that sewage, shown here in green, combined with stormwater, in blue, in the exact same pipes. During relatively dry weather, it worked pretty well. The network of pipes collected both rainwater and sewage and sent both to the treatment plant. But the problems began anytime it rained hard. All that runoff from the streets and roofs and parking lots would drain into the combined system and overwhelm it, overflowing into what are basically escape pipes that shoot directly out into the Willamette River. The city says overflows are about 80% stormwater and 20% sewage from your bathroom. That's not good. The sewage has E. coli bacteria, which is bad for humans and the environment. And that overflow happened on average 50 times a year, spewing 6 billion gallons of liquid out into the Willamette River and the Willamette Slough. So in 1991, the city and Oregon's Department of Environmental Quality entered into a legal agreement forcing the city to fix the problem. And then it was time for action. First, Portland started a campaign to cut the amount of stormwater going into the sewers. It also planned to build massive pipes on either side of the Willamette that would hold all that extra water during the storms and pump it to the sewage plant as fast as possible. The city eventually convinced people on the east side to disconnect 56,000 downspouts, which put water into yards instead of the sewer system, and it kept an estimated billion gallons out of the system. Then it was time to build the massive pipes. The first construction project focused on the Columbia Slough. A pipe 6 to 12 feet in diameter and 3.5 miles long was built. It was put in next to the slough to capture combined sewer overflows there. And it works. The city reports it stops 99% of the overflows. Another part of the work expanded the sewage treatment plant so that it could handle all that extra flow. The next project would be building the huge pipe on Portland's west side. It was much more complicated. 2 massive boring machines, and yes, Lewis and Clark are the names they gave them. Well, those machines went to work. One tunneled north, the other tunneled south. They worked 120 feet below the surface. They cut a tunnel 14 feet in diameter and 3.5 miles long. It runs along the Willamette's west bank and under the river to Swan Island on the east side. Now, you might be thinking, well, that would take the big pipe under most of our bridges. And yes, you are correct. It also runs under the waterfront park. Crews injected concrete into the ground to protect against settlement as the boring machine passed underneath the bridges. The machines were big. Those big circles at the front, they're called cutting heads. They were 16 feet in diameter. As they tunneled along, chewing through dirt and rock, it was carried out the back end and then to the surface and later barged upriver to help restore Ross Island Lagoon. As it advanced, hydraulic arms behind that cutter head installed precast steel-reinforced segments to create those tunnel rings. To give you an idea of how big it is, a Greyhound bus would fit inside easily with room to spare. All the water and sewage collected by the West Side Pipe needs to go somewhere, so contractors built a huge pump station on Swan Island to move everything along to the main sewage treatment plant. That pump station is 123 feet in diameter and 160 feet deep. That's big enough for a 15-story building. During wet weather like we had this week, it can move 100 million gallons of combined water and sewage every day. After the west side was finished, work on the east side pipe began. It's 22 feet in diameter, nearly 6 miles long. Everything is big. This pipe is tall enough for a giraffe to stand with no problem. Construction methods were similar to the west side, except one really big machine, the yellow one there, was used to dig the tunnel. It had to alter its course a time or two to avoid freeway bridge footings on the east side. But the city says super accurate laser guidance systems led the machine to within 1 inch of its final intended target.
How about that? Pretty cool, huh? So now you understand how all that works. You can see why those combined overflows are way less common these days. But they do still happen, but nowhere like they used to. Those massive tunnels on either side of the river, they collect and they hold all that extra water and sewage. Imagine that being completely full. And by the way, the city tracks and posts what's happening in those tunnels. Here's a graph showing the latest overflow. When the line goes up and hits 100%, that means the enormous tunnels are completely full, cannot hold any more sewage, and the rainwater and sewage is now going straight into the Willamette. That latest overflow started around 7 a.m. on Wednesday, December 6th, and lasted until about 1 o'clock, and then it started to drift back down. Now, this chart is updated every 15 minutes, and it shows that the tunnels now are nearly empty, just 1% filled with liquids. You can find this, by the way, by Googling Big Pipe. Finally, the big pipes were definitely long-term projects. Actual construction went from the year 2000 through 2011, and the total cost, roughly $1.4 billion. Now let's bring in our expert, meteorologist Matt Zaffino, to talk about how much rain it takes to cause these overflows. And I know you have numbers from 2 other times that it's happened this year, Matt.
Yeah, that's right, Pat. I wanted to look back at a couple of these because a sample size of 1, and this most recent one, I'm not surprised that we had the combined sewage overflow with the amount of rain that we had this week. So I looked at 3 events. The most recent, of course, December 6th and 7th. Actually, it's the 5th and the 6th. I looked at the day before the CSO and the day itself. So it's the 5th and the 6th. Here in downtown Portland, over 3 inches of rain. Same thing out at the airport. So when we get that kind of rainfall, I'm not surprised that even the big pipes overflow. That's a lot of water over, the entire Portland area. And we're going to talk about how many gallons that is a little bit later, Pat, I believe. So yeah, that's big. So let's look back at another one. This one was a little bit of a head scratcher. I remember when it happened back in May, the 7th and 8th. We only had 63/100ths of an inch of rain downtown, and the airport only had 1/4 of an inch of rain. I think part of the system might have been down for maintenance or something at that point, because this type of rainfall is, really pedestrian and wouldn't normally cause an overflow. So I'm not sure what happened with that one. Then the other one this year was back in March, and this was significant rainfall too. Over the 2-day period, the 12th and the 13th, over 1.5 inches of rain in Portland, and about the same out of the Portland airport. So usually it takes rainfall in 24 hours of over 1 inch, 1.5 inches to really trigger the CSO. And just to give you some more rainfall numbers, Pat, because it's so interesting what we did this week. I added up all the rainfall for these sites from the 1st through the 6th. 2 feet of rain on the south side of Mount St. Helens at Swift Creek. In the Bull Run, 16 inches of rain. That's helping our water supply, of course. Nehalem River and the Coast Range. Vancouver had over 8 inches of rain, and the airport 5.5 inches of rain. So not surprising that we had a CSO in spite of the big pipe, but boy, what a great job it does.
Oh my gosh. And I read somewhere that there could have been up to 1 trillion or maybe 3 trillion, I forget, gallons of water dumped on Oregon and Washington between those days.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised by that number, because if you think about it, you look at some of these rainfall amounts. Let's just take, one in the middle, say the Nehalem River, 15 inches of water over a huge area, say tens of square miles or hundreds of square miles. That adds up to a lot of gallons. And remember, this is all due to the atmospheric rivers that we had. And we had 3 in a row, basically, from Friday through early this week. Now, the average atmospheric river has about as much moisture, water vapor, as the Mississippi River holds at any one time. Strong atmospheric rivers can have 15 times the amount of water that's in the Mississippi River.
Wow.
And we had some strong atmospheric rivers. So trillions of gallons, that is totally feasible.
And then there's one more storm coming at us. Do you think that's going to cause a CSO?
Well, as a matter of fact, I've got a graphic for you on that as well, Pat. Let's look at the rainfall that's coming at us, and it is going to add up Saturday and Sunday to 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches in the valleys, 3 inches in the Cascade foothills and at the coast. So I'm glad those pipes are empty right now, like you showed us and told us, because there's a lot of water coming our way, and those amounts, they can trigger a CSO. So we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Wow. All right. Thank you, Matt. Fascinating as always.
You bet.
Coming up next on the story, the homeless crisis stretches far beyond the streets and campsites. Multnomah County Library employees are concerned about their safety, and a new county audit shows they're being forced to deal with weapons, drugs, you name it. We're going to dive into the details when the story returns. Yes, the KGW Toy Drive. There's just 10 days left now to give to this year's KGW Great Toy Drive. Now is a great time to give because Regents, Blue Cross, Blue Shield will kick in up to $5,000 if we collect that much from you all this week. You can also drop off a new unwrapped toy at any local Toyota dealership, Fred Meyer, or IQ Credit Union branch. And we even have a collection event going on this weekend. It's happening tomorrow at Clackamas Promenade. So if you're out there, drop by and say hi. Please help us bring some joy to thousands of families this holiday season. You know, the challenge of homelessness has spilled over into our libraries for years. Makes sense. It's a good place to get in out of the elements. But not everyone follows the rules, and now local librarians are sounding the alarm. A Multnomah County audit showed many workers don't feel safe or supported at work. Thomas Schultz has our report.
I think it should be as easy to get drug treatment as it is to get drugs.
For 15 years, Martha Jones has worked at libraries across Multnomah County, generally at the Central Library, or here in Northwest. The two libraries which an audit reports had the highest number of security incidents last year, 79 combined.
There are some pretty serious security incidents that have happened at the library.
Caroline Zavitkovsky is the Multnomah County Audit Director. She says the audit found library staff were threatened with knives, had to respond to drug overdoses, and dealt with an assortment of other issues.
One of the stories that stuck with me was somebody was talking about how a patron made a comment about how the police weren't going to show up because they knew response times were really poor and started, throwing around things.
The audit shows in 2022 there were more than 2,000 incident reports submitted at county libraries.
Morale is pretty low at the library.
There were some things highlighted that libraries could change to help staff feel more secure. That includes looking at trends of when incidents occur and strengthening the security response protocol. Zavitkovsky says adding more staff is also imperative. Now the library says they plan to follow recommendations. Still, with many homeless Portlanders utilizing libraries to charge phones and escape cold weather, workers say more help is needed.
There's no other place for them to go.
And the root issue must be solved by city and county government.
There's no reason there can't be a lot more day shelters, a lot more places for people to use bathrooms.
And this is the first time the county has audited libraries since 2004. When we asked why they chose now to audit the system, they say it was because of high employee dissatisfaction and news reports of escalating crime in public libraries. Thomas Schultz, KGW News.
Thanks, Thomas. Many of you will likely remember the story of Amanda Knox, the West Seattle exchange student who was arrested in Italy for murdering her British roommate. The case made international headlines for years, especially after it was revealed that Knox was coerced by police and wrongfully convicted. Tonight, Knox goes on the record with our colleague Joyce Taylor on what happened to her and how she's involved with helping others who've been wrongfully convicted. A conversation you do not want to miss when the story returns.
"14 years ago this week, American exchange student Amanda Knox was convicted of murdering her British roommate Meredith Kircher. She was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Her acquittal came 4 years later, after the cellmate of Rudy Gaudet, the first person convicted in Kircher's death, told authorities that Knox and her boyfriend, Raffaele Sollecito, had nothing to do with it. Many of us watched live as she collapsed in that courtroom in Perugia, learning she would finally be free. All these years later, Knox is hoping to clear her name of the slander conviction still hanging over her for falsely accusing her boss, Patrick Lumumba, of the murder. Tonight, Amanda Knox goes on the record. She talks about the lies that put her behind bars, what it means to be a defendant again, and what she's learned since becoming a mother.
I look back on 20-year-old Amanda fairly often because In a lot of ways, we're exactly the same person, and in very, very big ways, we're not. Like, I was having the time of my life, and then completely out of the blue, the worst possible thing happened.
Your instinct was to go to the police, to help them in any way that you could, because this roommate was not just a roommate, it was your friend.
Yeah, thank
And
you
so
for
that's
saying
what you
that.
did.
Yeah, a lot of people forget that she was also my friend. Like,
Right.
I mean, Meredith was at home when she was raped and murdered. And it was shocking. It shocked me so deeply to my core that I didn't really, at the very beginning, even know what to think or to do. So I just did what I was told. But so much of what really impacted this case happened within a few days prior to my arrest. And that was when the police were putting together their idea of what had happened in this case without any forensic evidence available to them. Unbeknownst to me, they were focusing in on me. I was the only person who had her cell phone tapped by the police. I was questioned for 53 hours over 5 days, way more than anyone else. But of course, I didn't know this. I think the thing that made me the most vulnerable, and that makes any innocent person most vulnerable, was that I assumed that my innocence was obvious.
Walk us through what happened that ended up with you in jail, waiting for trial for a year, and then actually being convicted and in prison, all starting with you wanting to help the police and your interrogation.
And as much as I told them that I had given them everything I possibly knew, they just wouldn't believe me, and it escalated. And they started lying to me. They told me that my boyfriend said I wasn't with him that night. They lied to me and told me that they had proof that I was at my house when I was actually at Raffaele's house. And it wasn't until this fake interpreter was brought in, who was actually a police officer, came in and told me a story. And she said, "That's what happened to you, Amanda. You went through something so horrible that you don't even remember it. But here's the thing. We need you to remember what we know you need to remember right now, or you're never going to see your family again." When I didn't remember correctly, they would hit me in the back of the head. I believed them at a certain point that I must have amnesia, that I must be scared and broken, because I felt scared and broken. And they got me to sign statements that implicated myself and others in a crime that we had nothing to do with, simply because they wanted to arrest someone as soon as possible.
Based on what happened with you, why do you want to help others?
You know, when I first came home, I didn't know how common wrongful convictions were. And it wasn't until I went to my first ever Innocence Network conference that I walked into a room full of hundreds of people who had been through the exact same experience as me. And they came up to me and told me that I didn't have to explain a thing to them because they already knew. Like, the relief that swept over me in that moment was life-changing. And I wanted to share that relief with others.
A lot of people, knowing what you have been through, would say, why doesn't she just want to just close the door on that, put it behind her?
You know, I have found that, first of all, the best way to grapple with trauma, instead of to looking away from it, is to look directly at it. That I still have deep trauma responses that arise from when I feel like authority figures are lying to me. Like that, I get a fear response when that happens. So I'm still processing my own trauma. But on top of that, I have found that by sharing my perspective about what happened, I am empowering other people to not find themselves in the situation I was in.
And then layer on top of that, you're a mother now. And I'm wondering if that at all plays a role in your involvement in trying to change the future so that what happened to you can't happen to them.
Absolutely. I mean, I had this incredible experience when my daughter was first born. I was afraid going up to giving birth to her of how the world was going to treat her, because she was my daughter. The thing that really hit me, though, was what it must have felt like to be my mom, going through everything that I was going through, and how much my mom would have given to trade places with me at any point, but she couldn't. And how many parents find themselves in that situation, just utterly powerless to help their kids as they're going through the torture of the justice system.
Let's talk about fully clearing your name.
Yes.
This slander
Yes.
charge.
While I am no longer a convict, which is great, I'm back to being a defendant. And it's a little surreal to be back in that space again. But I plan on pursuing justice to the fullest extent that I can. And I hope that ultimately I will be acquitted and really this whole thing could be put behind me.
Will you go back to Florence where this is going to be tried again?
Yes, I am prepared to stand up for myself in a court in Italy.
And to clear your name once and for all.
Absolutely.
That was Joyce Taylor interviewing Amanda Knox. Powerful stuff. The Washington Innocence Project that Knox works with hopes to get a bill passed in the legislature next year that would make it illegal for police to use any statements a suspect makes if they were lied to during their interrogation. And regarding the slander retrial Knox faces in Florence, Italy, so far, no date has been set. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. It just goes on and on and on, and it's wonderful. I'm taking some more time off next week, but Evan Watson is going to be here again, filling in for me. And all next week, environmental reporter Cale Williams has a spectacular special series bringing you regarding the 50th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act. So please be sure to tune in for that. And in the meantime, enjoy your weekend and join the story team right here Monday night at 6:30.